Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here. Before I begin, I want you to picture something. Picture the happiest moment you can imagine. For me, it was the day I found out I was going to be a grandmother. It felt like the sun had finally broken through the clouds after a long, gray winter. My late husband, Robert, and I had always dreamed of this. We'd raised our son, David, to be a kind, gentle man, and when he married Chloe, I thought our family was finally complete. I saw a future filled with tiny footsteps, scraped knees, bedtime stories, and the kind of laughter that makes a house feel like a home. But dreams have a funny way of turning into nightmares when you least expect it. My nightmare began with a closed curtain. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? A thin piece of fabric. But for me, that curtain was a wall, a fortress built to keep me out. And on the other side was my heart, my newborn grandson, Leo. I was standing in the maternity ward of Street Jude's hospital, my hands pressed against the cool glass of the nursery window. My breath fogged the pain as I searched for him among the rows of swaddled newborns. And then I saw him. He was perfect. A tiny tuft of dark hair, just like David's, and little fists that clenched and unclenched as if he was already dreaming of grasping the world. A wave of love so powerful it buckled my knees washed over me. This was him. This was the baby I had waited for my entire life. I had spent months knitting tiny blue blankets, painting a mural of gentle giraffes and elephants on the wall of the nursery I'd set up in my own home, just for when he would visit. I had bought every book on being a modern grandmother, determined to be supportive but not overbearing, present but not pushy. I was ready. But as I stood there, lost in that moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a figure appeared inside the nursery. It was Chloe, my daughter-in-law. She didn't look at me. Her face was a mask of something I couldn't quite read. Not joy, not exhaustion. It was a cold, hard resolve. She walked directly to the window where I stood, her eyes fixed on something beyond me, and then, with a single, deliberate motion, she reached up and pulled the privacy curtain shut, plunging my view into a sea of sterile white. The finality of it was like a slap. There was no hesitation, no apologetic glance, just a silent, brutal dismissal. I stood there, staring at the blank fabric, the reflection of my own shocked face looking back at me. My heart, which had been soaring just seconds before, plummeted into the pit of my stomach. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about a new mother needing privacy. This was a declaration. And what happened in the weeks and months that followed, the secrets I would uncover, would not only shatter my family but would lead to a DNA result that would leave every single person involved speechless. Let's go back a bit, so you understand. David is my only child. Robert, my husband of 40 years, passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, and David became the absolute center of my world. He's a good man, a software engineer with a heart as soft as the cashmere sweaters I used to knit for him. When he introduced me to Chloe, I was thrilled. She was a marketing executive, beautiful and ambitious, with a smile that could light up a room. I saw how David looked at her, and I thought, this is it. This is the woman who will make my son happy. I welcomed her with open arms. I threw them an engagement party, helped her plan the wedding, and gave her my mother's pearl necklace to wear on the big day, a tradition in our family. I wanted to be the mother-in-law she never had, since her own mother lived across the country and was, by Chloe's own admission, distant and critical. The first few years were fine. There were small things, little instances that felt like paper cuts. She'd forget to invite me to a dinner party with their friends. She'd make passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, disguised as jokes. "Oh, Eleanor, this casserole is so retro," she'd say with a tinkling laugh. David, bless his heart, never seemed to notice. He was so in love, he saw everything she did through a rose-tinted filter. I chalked it up to a generational gap, to the stress of her high-powered job. I told myself to be patient, to give her space. The last thing I wanted was to be the stereotypical meddling mother-in-law, so I backed off. I called less. I waited for them to call me. And the calls grew further and further apart. Then came the news of the pregnancy. David called me, his voice bursting with excitement. "Mom, you're going to be a grandma," he shouted into the phone, and I wept with joy. All the little slights, the distance, it all melted away. This baby, I thought, this baby will be the bridge. It will bring us all together. Throughout the pregnancy, I tried to be the perfect support system. I offered to go to doctor's appointments, but Chloe always said she preferred to go alone with David. I sent them articles about organic baby food and the best car seats, which were met with polite but dismissive. "Thanks, Eleanor. We've got it covered." I hosted a baby shower for her, inviting all my friends and her work colleagues. She smiled for the pictures, but I saw the strain in her eyes. I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, trying so hard to do the right thing, only to be met with a polite, impenetrable wall. The day she went into labor, I only found out because David sent me a one-line text message. "Hospital now. We'll update." I waited, my stomach in knots. Hours turned into a day. I called, I texted. Nothing. I was imagining the worst, my mind running through every possible complication. Finally, almost 24 hours later, another text from David. "It's a boy, Leo. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Mom and baby are tired. Need rest." That was it. No picture. No invitation to come see him, just a clinical report. I tried to reason with myself. Of course, they're exhausted. Of course, they need time to bond. I would wait. I waited another full day before I couldn't stand it anymore. I baked a lasagna, packed a bag of tiny hand-knitted hats, and drove to the hospital, my heart full of hope that I had simply been overthinking things. I found David in the hallway, looking pale and sleep-deprived. He gave me a weak hug. "Mom, what are you doing here? I told you they needed to rest." His voice was strained. "I know, sweetie," I said, holding up the lasagna. "I just wanted to drop this off. And maybe I could just peek at him for a second, through the window?" David hesitated, his eyes darting nervously towards Chloe's room. I don't know, Mom. Chloe is really protective right now. She doesn't want any visitors." "Any visitors?" I was his grandmother. I wasn't any visitor, but I saw the plea in my son's eyes, the exhaustion of a man caught between the two most important women in his life. I relented. "Okay, sweetie, you're right. I'll just look through the nursery window then. I won't bother anyone." He looked relieved, mumbled his thanks, and disappeared back into Chloe's room, leaving me alone in the sterile, quiet hallway. And that's what led me to that window. That's what led me to that moment of pure joy, followed by the cold, deliberate closing of a curtain. It was a message, sent loud and clear. "You are not welcome here." I drove home in a daze, the lasagna growing cold on the passenger seat, my mind replaying that simple, brutal act over and over. I didn't know why. I didn't know what I had done to deserve it, but I knew this was just the beginning of a battle I never wanted to fight. If you've ever felt shut out by someone you love, if you've ever had your heart broken by family, then you know a fraction of what I was feeling. And if you want to know how this story of heartbreak turned into a shocking discovery that blew our family apart, please subscribe to my channel. You won't believe what happened next. The days that followed my visit to the hospital were some of the longest and loneliest of my life. The wall Chloe had put up with that curtain in the nursery extended to every form of communication. My texts asking for a picture of Leo were left on read. My calls to David went straight to voicemail, and when he did call back, hours later, his voice was always rushed, his excuses flimsy. "Sorry, Mom. We were just in the middle of a feeding. Chloe's not feeling well. We're trying to keep the house quiet. Leo's colic is acting up. It's just chaos here." It was always we, never just him. It felt like every word he spoke was being carefully monitored, scripted by an unseen director. I tried to be understanding. I truly did. I remembered the whirlwind of being a new mother, the exhaustion so profound it felt like a physical weight on your bones. I sent them a gift certificate for a meal delivery service, thinking it would ease their burden. I received a generic thank you text from David's phone 2 days later. I confided in my best friend, Carol, over a cup of tea in my quiet, lonely kitchen. Carol and I have been friends since our sons were in kindergarten together. She's pragmatic, a retired nurse who has seen it all and isn't afraid to speak her mind. I poured out the whole story, the distant pregnancy, the texts, the hospital, the curtain. Her brow furrowed with concern as I spoke. "Eleanor, this is not normal new mom behavior," she said, stirring her tea with more force than necessary. "Protective is one thing. Hostile is another. She's deliberately freezing you out, and David is letting her." Her words were blunt, but they echoed the fears that had been swirling in my own mind. "But why, Carol? What did I do?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I've tried so hard to be the mother-in-law everyone dreams of. I give them space. I don't offer unsolicited advice. I've given them nothing but love and support." "Maybe that's the problem," Carol mused, her eyes thoughtful. "Some people, Eleanor, see kindness as a weakness they can exploit. Chloe has always been about control. I've seen it in the way she organizes parties, the way she manages her career, and the way she manages your son. Now, she has the baby, and in her mind, that's the ultimate trump card. She controls access to your grandson, so she controls you." The thought was chilling, but it made a terrifying kind of sense. All those little paper cuts over the years weren't accidental. They were tests, probes to see how much I would take, how far I would let myself be pushed away before I pushed back. And I had never pushed back. I had always retreated, telling myself it was the right thing to do, the peaceful thing to do. A week after Leo was born, I received an e-announcement. It was a professionally taken photograph of David and Chloe, beaming, holding a perfectly sleeping baby Leo. The caption read, "Introducing Leo James Miller. Our world is forever changed." My heart ached as I looked at the picture. He was beautiful. He had my husband's nose, but the pain was sharp. Knowing that this picture, this announcement, was sent to hundreds of friends and acquaintances, while I, his grandmother, had yet to hold him or even see him in person. It felt like a public performance of a happy family, a performance from which I was explicitly excluded. I swallowed my pride and texted David. "The announcement is beautiful. Leo is so handsome. I'm so proud of you both. Would love to drop off his gift whenever you're ready for a short visit." The 3 little dots appeared and disappeared for what felt like an eternity before a reply came back. "Thanks, Mom. Things are still really hectic. Maybe next week." Next week came and went. Then the week after that. My excuses for my friends started to wear thin. "Oh, the new parents just need their space. You know how at Island. They're just being extra cautious with germs." The lies felt like ash in my mouth. The beautiful nursery in my house remained silent, the crib empty, the rocking chair still. It began to feel less like a room of hope and more like a museum of my foolish expectations. The giraffes and elephants on the wall seemed to mock me with their cheerful, painted smiles. I started to close the door to that room. It was too painful to look at. My breaking point came a month after Leo's birth. I saw on a friend's social media page that Chloe's mother, Catherine, had flown in from California for a visit. There were pictures, Catherine holding Leo, beaming with pride. Catherine pushing Leo in a stroller through the park. A big family dinner at David and Chloe's house, with Catherine at the head of the table, right next to David. I wasn't invited. I wasn't even told she was in town. The hypocrisy was staggering. My son's mother, who lived 15 minutes away, was being told the house was in chaos and they couldn't handle visitors. But Chloe's mother, who lived thousands of miles away, was welcomed for an extended stay, celebrated and photographed like a queen. I didn't call. I didn't text. I got in my car and drove to their house. The anger that had been simmering inside me for a month finally boiled over. I was done being patient. I was done being understanding. I was a grandmother, and I was going to see my grandson. When I pulled up to their tidy suburban home, I saw Catherine's rental car in the driveway. I took a deep breath, walked up the stone path, and rang the doorbell. It took a few moments, but finally, the door opened. It was David. The look on his face was a mixture of sheer panic and deep, gut-wrenching guilt. "Mom," he stammered, his body instinctively blocking the doorway. "What? What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Chloe appeared behind him. She was holding Leo, wrapped in a blanket. She had a tight, polite smile plastered on her face, but her eyes were like chips of ice. "Eleanor, this is a surprise," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We weren't expecting company." I looked past her and saw Catherine sitting in the living room, a cup of tea in her hand. She gave me a cool, dismissive nod. The message was clear. There are two grandmothers in this baby's life, and you are not the preferred one. My anger evaporated, replaced by a profound sadness. I looked at my son, this man I had raised, who was now standing in front of me like a gatekeeper to my own family. "David," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm not company. I'm your mother. I would like to see my grandson." Chloe adjusted her hold on Leo, turning him away from me. "Now isn't a good time, Eleanor. Leo is about to take a nap." The excuse was so flimsy, so insulting. It was almost laughable. The baby was wide awake, his little eyes curiously taking in the scene. I looked at David, searching his face for any sign of the boy I once knew. "David? Please." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at a spot on the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Mom, maybe you should just go," he mumbled. "We'll call you soon." And with that, he slowly, gently, closed the door in my face. I stood on the porch, listening to the lock click into place. It was the sound of a final, definitive rejection. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of my own heart breaking. Standing on that porch after my own son had closed the door on me was a new kind of low. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I stumbled back to my car in a fog, the friendly neighborhood with its manicured lawns and cheerful mailboxes feeling like a hostile alien landscape. For the first time, the full weight of the situation crashed down on me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't new parent stress. This was a calculated, deliberate campaign to erase me from my grandson's life. And my own son was a willing, or at least compliant, participant. I drove home, but I don't remember the journey. My mind was a chaotic storm of questions. Why? What had I done that was so unforgivable? Was this Chloe's doing alone? Or did David harbor some secret resentment towards me that I had been blind to all these years? The next few days were a blur of grief. I felt like I was mourning a death, the death of the family I thought I had, the death of the future I had so lovingly imagined. I ignored Carol's calls. I didn't want to hear her say, "I told you so," even though I knew she would be gentle about it. I just wanted to be alone with my pain. I'd wander through my quiet house, tracing the outlines of photographs on the mantelpiece Robert and me on our wedding day. A gap-toothed David on his first day of school. These were relics from a life that felt a million miles away. I had poured everything I had into being a good mother, and after Robert died, David was my rock. We were a team. How had that team dissolved so completely? After nearly a week of wallowing, I finally answered Carol's persistent calls. Her voice was a balm of reason in my sea of emotional turmoil. "Okay, Eleanor, you've had your time to grieve," she said, her tone firm but kind. "Now it's time to think. This isn't just about hurt feelings anymore. Something is fundamentally wrong over there, and you need to figure out what it island." She was right. My passive, heartbroken approach wasn't working. It was only giving Chloe more power, more control. If I wanted to be a part of Leo's life, I couldn't wait for an invitation that was clearly never going to come. I needed a new strategy. My first thought was to confront David, but I knew a head-on collision at his house would end with another closed door. I needed to get him alone, away from Chloe's influence. I started thinking like a detective, or more accurately, like the research librarian I had been for 30 years before I retired. I knew David's routine. He went to the same coffee shop every morning before work, a little place called the Daily Grind halfway between his house and his office. Chloe never joined him. She said their coffee was too basic. It was the perfect opportunity. The next morning, I was there before him, sitting at a small table in the corner, pretending to read a book, my heart hammering against my ribs. When he walked in, he didn't see me at first. He looked tired, older than his 34 years, with dark circles under his eyes. He ordered his usual large black coffee and was about to leave when I said his name. "David." He froze, his hand halfway to the door. When he turned and saw me, the color drained from his face. He looked like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Mom, what are you doing here? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I'm having coffee, sweetie, I said calmly, patting the empty chair across from me. Sit with me for a minute. Please? He hesitated, glancing at his watch, at the door, anywhere but at me. But he must have seen something in my eyes, a resolve that wasn't there before, because he sighed, defeated, and sat down. For a long moment, we just sat in silence, the bustling morning sounds of the coffee shop swirling around us. Finally, I spoke. I want to understand, David. I need you to tell me what's going on. Why are you and Chloe treating me like a stranger? Why did you shut the door in my face when your own mother came to see her grandson? He winced at the directness of my questions. He stirred his coffee, though it was already black, his spoon clinking nervously against the ceramic mug. Mom, it's complicated, he began, using that infuriatingly vague word again. Chloe's had a really hard time since the birth. She's not herself. The doctors think it might be severe postpartum depression. She feels overwhelmed by everything, and she thinks having visitors will make it worse. She needs to feel in control. It was a plausible explanation. Postpartum depression was real, and it was serious. It could make women behave in ways that were completely out of character. But something about it didn't feel right. The coldness, the calculation behind Chloe's actions, it didn't seem like the chaotic fog of depression. It felt more like a strategy. And why would her own mother's visit be fine, but mine be a trigger? So her mother's visit helped her feel more in control? I asked, keeping my voice even. David flushed. That was different. Her mom came to help out, it's her mom. The implication hung in the air. You're not. I want to help too, David, I said, my voice softening. I love you, and I already love Leo more than words can say. I'm not trying to take over. I just want to be a part of his life. Your grandmother was my best friend. She was there for every milestone. I want to give Leo that. A flicker of the old David, my sweet, sensitive son, appeared in his eyes. I could see the guilt and the sadness warring within him. He leaned forward, his voice dropping so low I could barely hear him. Mom, I know. I'm sorry. It's just, Chloe is under an insane amount of pressure right now. It's not just the baby. There are other things. Things from before. Oh, what things? I pressed gently. What things from before? He shook his head, pulling back as if he'd already said too much. I can't. I promised I wouldn't talk about it. Just, please, Mom, can you just give us a little more time? A few more weeks. I promise I will fix this. I will. He looked at me with such desperation, such a pleading in his eyes that my resolve wavered. This wasn't the man who was complicit in shutting me out. This was a man who was trapped, who was carrying a burden he couldn't share. Other things. The words echoed in my mind. This wasn't about me at all. I was just collateral damage in a war I knew nothing about. The wall Chloe had built wasn't just to keep me out. It was to keep a secret in. David finished his coffee in a single gulp, stood up, and squeezed my shoulder. I have to go. I love you, Mom. And then he was gone, leaving me alone at the table with 100 new questions. The conversation hadn't given me the answers I wanted, but it had given me something far more important. A clue. A crack in the wall. There was a secret so significant that it had turned my daughter-in-law into a fortress and my son into her weary guard. My heartbreak began to morph into something else, something sharper. It was a fierce, protective instinct, not just for the grandson I couldn't see, but for the son who was clearly in over his head. I left the coffee shop that day with a new mission. I was no longer just a grandmother fighting for access. I was a mother fighting to uncover a truth that I suspected was far darker and more complicated than I could ever have imagined. And I, Eleanor Miller, retired research librarian, knew exactly how to begin my investigation. My conversation with David at the coffee shop shifted everything. The mystery was no longer just, why does Chloe hate me? But a much larger, more ominous question. What is Chloe hiding? My years as a librarian had taught me one fundamental truth. Every story has a beginning, and the answers are almost always found by starting there. I went home and, for the first time, approached the problem not with an aching heart, but with a clear, analytical mind. I opened my laptop, the familiar glow a comfort in my quiet study. If Chloe was dealing with things from before, as David had hinted, then her past was the place to start. I began where most modern investigations do: social media. It felt invasive, almost shameful, to be digging into my daughter-in-law's digital life, but the memory of that closed door, of my son's haunted eyes, propelled me forward. I started with her public profiles. They were impeccably curated, of course. A timeline of professional successes, stylish vacations with David, and glowing posts about her pregnancy journey. It was a perfect picture of a perfect life, but it felt hollow, like a stage set. I knew the truth was always in the details, in the things people didn't post. I scrolled back, years back, before she had met David. Her life seemed just as polished then, a rising star at her marketing firm, networking events, charity galas. I decided to branch out. I looked at the profiles of her bridesmaids, her closest work colleagues, the people who were tagged in her older photos. It was tedious work, like panning for gold in a river of digital noise. I spent hours sifting through old vacation albums, birthday posts, and casual check-ins. Most of it was useless, a montage of brunches and celebrations. But I was looking for inconsistencies, for anything that didn't quite fit the pristine narrative Chloe presented. I made a timeline of her life for the 2 years before she met David, cross-referencing her posts with public information about her company and events she claimed to have attended. After 2 solid days of this, my eyes burning from staring at the screen, I found something. It was small, almost insignificant, but it was a loose thread. Chloe had a post from about a year before she started dating David, celebrating a huge promotion at her firm, Miller and Vance Marketing. The post was full of comments from colleagues congratulating her. One of them, a woman named Jessica Thorne, wrote, "So deserved. No one works harder. That marathon project in Chicago finally paid off." I remembered Chloe mentioning a big project in Chicago that had been a major stepping stone in her career. But then, as I was looking through Jessica Thorne's old public photo albums from that same time period, I found a picture from a different event, a marketing conference in Miami. And there, in the background, laughing with a group of people by the pool, was Chloe. The photo was time-stamped. It was from the exact same week she was supposedly pulling all-nighters on that marathon project in Chicago. My heart started to beat a little faster. It was a lie. A small, seemingly pointless lie, but a lie nonetheless. Why would she lie about being in Chicago if she was in Miami? I dug deeper into the Miami conference. I found the event's official website, a speaker list, an itinerary. It was a huge industry event. I scanned the list of sponsors and speakers, and one name jumped out at me: Sterling Enterprises, a massive real estate development firm. And the keynote speaker from that company was its CEO, a man named Marcus Thorne. Wait, Thorne? The same last name as Chloe's colleague, Jessica. A quick search confirmed it. Marcus Thorne was Jessica's older brother, a notoriously powerful and charismatic and very married businessman. Suddenly, the pieces started to click into place in a way that made me feel sick to my stomach. Chloe wasn't in Chicago working on a project. She was in Miami at a conference where her colleague's wealthy, married, and powerful brother was the keynote speaker. It wasn't proof of anything, of course. It was circumstantial. But it was a crack in the perfect facade. It was a secret. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. What if the things from before David mentioned weren't just professional pressures, but personal ones? I kept digging, now with a specific target in mind: Marcus Thorne. His digital footprint was as polished as Chloe's, all business and philanthropy. His wife was a society figure, and their family was often featured in local magazines. They were the picture of wealth and stability. There was no public link between him and Chloe, other than the fact that she worked with his sister. But librarians know that the most important information is often not on the surface. I started looking into old news articles, business journals, anything that mentioned Sterling Enterprises around that time. I was looking for a connection, any mention of Miller and Vance Marketing partnering with them. And then I found it. It wasn't a headline. It was buried deep in a trade publication article about a major urban redevelopment project that Sterling Enterprises had won. The article mentioned the various firms they had contracted for the project. Tucked away in a long list was a single sentence. Initial marketing and community outreach strategy was developed by Miller and Vance Marketing, though the partnership was later dissolved due to creative differences. The timeline matched perfectly. The Chicago project Chloe had lied about must have been a cover for the real project she was working on, the one with Marcus Thorne's company, a partnership that was dissolved. Why? What creative differences were so significant that they would end a lucrative partnership? My mind was racing, connecting dots I never knew existed. A secret project, a lie about her location, a powerful, married man, a partnership that abruptly ended. And now, years later, a baby she was desperately hiding from the world, and a son of mine who was buckling under the weight of a secret he couldn't share. The picture was still blurry, but the outline was becoming terrifyingly clear. I had gone from a heartbroken grandmother to an accidental investigator, and I had stumbled upon something far more complex than a simple family dispute. I had found the edges of a secret that Chloe had tried to bury for years. The problem was, I still had no concrete proof. I had a theory, a web of connections, but nothing solid. And I knew that confronting them with this would only result in more lies, more denials. Chloe was too smart for that. If I was going to get to the truth, I needed more than just old social media posts and buried news articles. I needed a professional. I needed someone who could find the truth Chloe had worked so hard to hide. It was time to call a lawyer. The decision to involve a lawyer felt like crossing a point of no return. This was no longer just a family drama I could hope to resolve with a heartfelt conversation. I was now actively investigating my own daughter-in-law, and the thought left a bitter taste in my mouth. But the alternative to live in the dark, shut out from my grandson's life while my son suffered in silence, was unthinkable. I made an appointment with a man named Arthur Harrison, a family law attorney my friend Carol had recommended. His office was in a stately old brick building downtown, filled with law books and the quiet, serious hum of professionalism. It was a world away from the emotional chaos of my own life. Mr. Harrison was an older man with kind eyes and a calm, reassuring demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I sat across from his large mahogany desk, and, for a full hour, I laid out the entire story. I told him everything, starting with the closed curtain at the hospital and ending with my late-night discovery of Chloe's Miami trip and the mysterious, dissolved partnership with Marcus Thorne's company. I expected him to be skeptical, to perhaps gently suggest that I was a grandmother letting her imagination run wild. But he listened patiently, taking meticulous notes, his expression growing more serious with every detail I shared. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers, looking at me thoughtfully. "Eleanor," he said, his voice grave, "I want to be very clear. Your instincts are sound. What you've described goes far beyond typical family friction. The systematic exclusion, your son's distress, and your daughter-in-law's documented deception, it all points to a significant underlying issue. Your theory about Marcus Thorne is compelling, but as you said, it's circumstantial. To move forward, we need evidence." "But how do I get evidence?" I asked, feeling a fresh wave of helplessness. "She won't let me near the baby, and David won't talk. It's a fortress. You don't get it yourself," he replied. "That would be a mistake. We do this professionally. We hire a private investigator." The words hung in the air, feeling both melodramatic and terrifyingly real. A private investigator. Like something out of a movie. The idea of hiring a stranger to spy on my son and his wife felt like a profound betrayal. But as I looked at Mr. Harrison, at his calm, professional face, I realized this was the logical next step. My amateur sleuthing had taken me as far as it could. "A pie can operate in ways you can't," he continued, sensing my hesitation. "They can conduct surveillance legally. They can run background checks that go deeper than a simple internet search. They can look into financial records, phone records, things that can paint a much clearer picture of what's truly going on. We're not looking to trap her, Eleanor. We're looking to understand the truth. so we can protect your son and ensure you have a legal right to see your grandson." His words were a life raft. He wasn't just focused on the drama, he was focused on a legal, tangible outcome. Grandparents' rights. The thought that there was a legal framework for what I wanted gave me a surge of hope. He recommended a man named Frank Russo, an investigator he had worked with for over 20 years, known for his discretion and his thoroughness. The next day, I met Frank in a neutral location, a quiet corner of a hotel lobby. He was a plain-looking man in his 50s, the kind of person who could blend into any crowd, which I supposed was the point. He had a no-nonsense air about him, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. I felt a renewed sense of unease as I handed over a file containing everything I had found. Photos of Chloe and David, their address, Marcus Thorne's information, and a printout of my timeline of events. "So, what exactly are we looking for, Mrs. Miller?" Frank asked, his voice low and direct. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "My son is miserable. My daughter-in-law is hiding my grandson from me and lying about her past. There's a powerful, married man who seems to be connected to all of it. I need to know what the secret island. I need to know if my son is safe, if my grandson is safe." Frank nodded, his expression unreadable. "Okay, I'll start with some light surveillance on your daughter-in-law. See her routine, who she meets, where she goes. I'll also do a deep dive into the financials of both Chloe and Marcus Thorne's company around the time their partnership dissolved. Money always tells a story." He told me his rates, which were steep, but I didn't hesitate. What was money compared to the well-being of my family? I wrote him a check, feeling like I was paying for passage into a dark and unknown territory. The next 2 weeks were agonizing. Frank had instructed me to act completely normal. I was to send my usual, polite, unanswered texts. I was to continue being the patient, waiting grandmother. It was the hardest acting job of my life. Every ping from my phone made my heart leap, thinking it was Frank with news. Carol was my lifeline, calling me every evening to check in. "Any word from the spy?" she'd ask, her dark humor a small comfort. "Not yet," I'd reply, my stomach in knots. The waiting is the worst part. During this time, I tried to focus on anything else. I volunteered at the local library. I went for long walks. I even tried to pick up my knitting again, but my hands were too restless. My mind was constantly in overdrive, imagining what Frank might be discovering. Was Chloe having an affair? Was she being blackmailed? Was there some old scandal she was terrified would come to light? Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, Frank called. "I have something," he said, his voice void of emotion. "Can you meet me at the same place in an hour?" My heart pounded as I drove to the hotel. I found him in the same corner booth, a thick manila envelope on the table in front of him. He didn't waste time with small talk. He opened the envelope and slid a series of photographs across the table. The first few showed Chloe going about a seemingly normal routine, pushing Leo in a stroller to the park, going to the grocery store. But then came the pictures that made my breath catch. There was a photo of Chloe, in a different part of town, getting into a sleek black car. A photo of that same car parked in the underground garage of a downtown office building the headquarters of Sterling Enterprises. And then, the most damning one of all. It was a long lens shot, slightly grainy, taken through the window of a private, high-end restaurant. It showed Chloe sitting at a table, not with David, but with Marcus Thorne. They weren't smiling. They weren't laughing. They looked tense, engaged in a serious, almost desperate conversation. Chloe was holding a document, and Marcus was leaning across the table, his expression intense. "They met for 2 hours yesterday," Frank said, his voice a low murmur. "This is the 3rd time in 2 weeks. It's not romantic. My source at the restaurant said it felt more like a business negotiation, and a very strained one at that. He's been following her, too. He found a recent, large deposit into a new bank account she opened under her maiden name. $50,000, wired from an LLC that I traced back to a subsidiary of Sterling Enterprises. I stared at the photos, at the numbers, my mind struggling to process it all. $50,000. A secret bank account, secret meetings with a powerful ex-colleague. This was bigger than an old lie about a work trip. This was an active, ongoing situation. What does it mean, Frank? I whispered. Is he paying her for something? Is it hush money? That's one possibility, Frank said, his eyes meeting mine. But there's something else you should know. I ran a comprehensive background check, and I found the official timeline for that Sterling Enterprises project she was secretly working on. Based on that timeline, and the date of Leo's birth, there's a statistical possibility that the timing of conception overlaps with the period she was working closely with Marcus Thorne, not with the time she officially started dating your son. He let the words hang in the air, their weight crushing me. The thought was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that I had refused to even let it form in my own mind. But now, here it was, spoken aloud by a stranger in a hotel lobby. The secret wasn't just about money or an old affair. The secret, the real secret, might be sleeping in a crib just a few miles away. The secret might be Leo himself. Frank's words echoed in my head long after I left the hotel lobby. A statistical possibility. It was a cold, clinical phrase for something so deeply personal, so earth-shattering. Could it be true? Could Leo, the grandson I had fallen in love with through a pane of glass, not be my grandson at all? The idea was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. I drove home on autopilot, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my mind a dizzying kaleidoscope of images. Chloe's icy stare, David's haunted eyes, the secret meeting with Marcus Thorne, the $50,000 deposit. It was all starting to form a narrative so ugly, so profoundly deceitful, that my heart ached for my son. When I got home, I immediately called Mr. Harrison. I relayed everything Frank had told me, my voice trembling as I spoke the possibility aloud for the first time. Frank thinks Leo might not be David's son. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mr. Harrison finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Eleanor, this is a very serious allegation. A statistical possibility is not proof. It's a theory, a strong one, but we cannot act on it without confirmation. If we confront them now, Chloe will deny everything, destroy any evidence, and paint you as a hysterical, meddling woman. She would use it to cut you and David off from each other permanently. So what do we do? I cried, the frustration and helplessness overwhelming me. How do we get proof? There's only one way to get irrefutable proof, Eleanor, he said softly. We need a DNA sample. We need to test Leo's DNA against David's. The idea was both terrifying and validating. It was the only way to know for sure, to cut through the web of lies and get to the undeniable biological truth. But the logistical challenge was immense. How on earth am I supposed to do that? I asked. Chloe watches him like a hawk. She barely lets David's own mother in the house. I can't exactly walk in and ask for a cheek swab. You won't have to, Mr. Harrison assured me. We just need an object with Leo's saliva on it. A used pacifier, a teething toy, even a heavily used bib. Anything he's had in his mouth, we can extract a viable DNA sample from that. And we can get David's sample easily. We can use an old toothbrush from his childhood room here at your house, or even a stray hair from a coat he's left behind. The plan was audacious, and it felt deeply wrong on one level. I would have to be deceptive, to scheme my way into my son's home to procure an object from a baby. But what choice did I have? The alternative was to let my son live a potential lie, to be shut out of a child's life based on a secret that was poisoning their entire family. My protective instincts overrode my ethical reservations. I had to do it. Now, the question was how. I couldn't just show up at their door again. After my last visit, I was surely persona non grata. I needed a Trojan horse, a reason to be there that was so plausible, so sentimental, that even Chloe, in her paranoid state, couldn't refuse. I spent the next 2 days brainstorming with Carol, who had thrown herself into the role of my co-conspirator with grim determination. We discarded a dozen ideas. Dropping off another casserole was too obvious. Asking to babysit was out of the question. Finally, we landed on the perfect plan. It was rooted in family history, something so personal to David that Chloe would look monstrous if she refused. Years ago, my husband Robert had started a tradition. For every new baby born into our extended family, he would build a small, handcrafted wooden rocking horse. He had built one for David, which still sat in my attic. Before he died, he had sketched out the plans for the one he hoped to one day build for his first grandchild, but he never got the chance. My plan was to finish it for him. I would spend a week in my garage, sanding, painting, and assembling the rocking horse he had designed. Then, I would call David and tell him that I had completed his father's final gift for Leo, a precious family heirloom, and I wanted to deliver it in person. It was a gesture of peace, of love, something that transcended the current drama. David, who still idolized his father, would never say no, and he would pressure Chloe to agree. The next week was a strange mix of grief and purpose. I found Robert's old plans in a dusty box in the attic, his familiar, neat handwriting making my heart ache. As I worked on the horse in my garage, the scent of sawdust and wood varnish filling the air, I felt closer to him than I had in years. It was as if he was there with me, guiding my hands, giving me the strength to see this through. I poured all my love, my pain, and my hope into that piece of wood. I painted it a soft, gentle blue, with a little white star on its forehead, just like the one he had made for David. When it was finished, it was beautiful. A perfect tribute to my husband's love for a grandson he would never meet. The final piece of the plan was the gift. I went to a high-end baby boutique and bought an assortment of teething toys. One in particular caught my eye, a brightly colored, soft silicone giraffe. It was the kind of toy a baby would chew on for hours. I wrapped it beautifully and attached a card that read, "A little something extra for our sweet Leo." The stage was set. I took a deep breath and made the call to David. I explained about the rocking horse, my voice thick with genuine emotion. I told him how much it would mean to me, and to his father's memory, to give it to Leo myself. As I had predicted, he was deeply moved. "Mom, that's incredible," he said, his voice choked with tears. Of course you can bring it over. Let me talk to Chloe. We'll make it happen this weekend." The wait for his call back was excruciating. Every hour felt like a day. Finally, on Friday evening, he called. "Okay, Mom. Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Chloe says that works. But just for a little while, okay? Leo's schedule is still all over the place." "Of course, sweetie," I said, my voice calm, belying the frantic beating of my heart. "I won't stay long. I promise." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. The plan was in motion. On Sunday, I would walk into the lion's den, not just as a grandmother, but as an operative on the most important mission of my life. Sunday arrived cloaked in a tense, gray sky that perfectly mirrored the storm brewing inside me. The beautiful wooden rocking horse, Robert's legacy, was carefully wrapped in a blanket in the back of my car. Beside it sat the brightly wrapped gift bag containing the silicone giraffe, my Trojan horse. My hands were clammy as I drove, my stomach a tangled mess of nerves. I felt like a criminal, a spy about to infiltrate enemy territory. But this territory was my son's home, and the enemy was the woman he had married. The thought was so absurd, so painful, that I had to focus on my breathing just to keep my composure. I had one goal: get in, create an opportunity for Leo to use the teether, and get out with the sample. When I pulled into their driveway, I saw that the curtains in the front window were drawn as usual. I took a deep breath, pasted on a pleasant, non-threatening smile, and rang the doorbell. David answered, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flash of genuine warmth in his eyes. "Mom, come in." He helped me carry the rocking horse into the living room. As we unwrapped it, his eyes welled up. It's just like mine," he whispered, running a hand over the smooth, painted wood. "Dad would have loved this." In that moment, he wasn't a gatekeeper or a man trapped by secrets. He was just my son, grieving his father and celebrating his new baby. It almost made me want to call the whole thing off. Then Chloe walked in, holding Leo. She was dressed impeccably, as always, but there were faint, dark circles under her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite conceal. She surveyed the scene, her eyes landing on the rocking horse with a cool, appraising glance. "It's very traditional, Eleanor," she said, her tone making it sound like an insult. "Thank you." There was no warmth, no appreciation for the sentiment. It was just another object in her perfectly curated house. But then her eyes fell on Leo, who was squirming in her arms, his gaze fixed on the brightly colored horse. For the first time, a genuine, albeit faint, smile touched her lips. This was my opening. "And I brought a little something extra for the birthday boy," I said cheerfully, handing her the gift bag. "Well, the 1-month birthday boy, anyway." Chloe took the bag, her smile tightening again. She unwrapped the gift and pulled out the silicone giraffe. Leo's eyes lit up, and he immediately made a grab for it, his little fingers fumbling. "Oh, he seems to like that," I said, trying to sound casual. "It's supposed to be great for teething." Chloe examined the toy, turning it over in her hands as if checking for hidden microphones. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, she seemed to deem it acceptable and handed it to Leo, who promptly shoved a corner of it into his mouth and began gumming it happily. My heart soared. Phase 1 was complete. Now came the hard part, creating a distraction to retrieve it. I sat on the couch, making polite small talk, my eyes darting between Chloe and the baby. She held him close, her body language a fortress. She wasn't going to just put him down and walk away. I needed to separate her from the baby, even for just a minute. I complimented the house, the new rug, anything to keep the conversation flowing. David, bless him, tried to help, talking animatedly about a new project at work. But Chloe was a sentry, her focus entirely on Leo. Then, a stroke of luck. Or perhaps divine intervention from Robert. The baby, after a few minutes of vigorous chewing, did what babies do. He spit up, a small amount, but it was enough to dribble down the front of Chloe's expensive silk blouse. Her face contorted in a flash of annoyance. "Oh, for goodness sake," she muttered, her perfect composure finally cracking. "I'll be right back. David, hold him." She thrust the baby, and the giraffe still clutched in his hand, into David's arms and hurried out of the room towards the master bedroom. This was my chance. It was now or never. My mind raced. I needed David out of the room, too. "David, sweetie," I said, my voice a picture of motherly concern. "That spit-up smells a bit sour. Do you think his formula is agreeing with him? I have an article on my phone about different brands for sensitive tummies. It's in my purse in the car. Could you be a dear and grab it for me? I'm just so worried." It was a ridiculous request, and for a second I thought he'd see right through it. But my son, ever eager to please and genuinely worried about his son's well-being, fell for it. "Oh yeah, sure, Mom. That's a good idea. I'll be right back." He placed Leo, who was still happily chewing on the giraffe, into his bassinet in the corner of the living room and headed for the front door. The moment I heard the door click shut, I was in motion. I had maybe 60 seconds. My heart was a drum against my ribs as I crossed the room to the bassinet. Leo looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes, the giraffe still in his mouth. My hand trembled as I reached down. I felt like a thief, stealing from a baby, but I pushed the guilt down. I gently took the wet, slobbery giraffe from his little hand, replacing it with another, identical one I had hidden in my pocket. It was a risky move, but I couldn't leave him with nothing to chew on, or Chloe would be instantly suspicious. I quickly slipped the saliva-covered giraffe into a sterile plastic baggie I had brought and tucked it deep into my purse. Just as I zipped it shut, I heard David's footsteps on the porch. I rushed back to the couch, my cheeks flushed, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, picking up a magazine just as he walked back in. "Couldn't find the article, Mom," he said, looking confused. "Was it in the side pocket?" "Oh, you know what, sweetie? It's probably on my tablet at home." "Don't worry about it," I said, trying to sound breezy. Just then, Chloe returned, having changed her blouse. She picked Leo up from the bassinet, took the new giraffe from his hand, and wiped it meticulously with an antibacterial wipe before giving it back. I watched her, my heart in my throat, praying she wouldn't notice the switch. She didn't. The toys were identical. She had no reason to suspect a thing. I had done it. I had the sample. I stayed for another 10 agonizing minutes, making polite conversation, before making my excuses to leave. "It was so wonderful to see you all," I said, giving David a hug. I even offered one to Chloe, who accepted with a stiff, formal embrace. As I walked out the door, I felt her eyes on my back, cold and suspicious. She knew something was off, but she didn't know what, and that was all I needed. I got into my car, the precious plastic baggie in my purse feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. The mission was a success, but I felt no triumph. Only a deep, aching dread for the truth that was now just a laboratory test away. The days after securing Leo's DNA sample were a unique form of torture. I had overnighted the package containing the giraffe in its sterile baggie, and one of David's old electric toothbrush heads from his bathroom at my house to a highly reputable, discreet lab Mr. Harrison had recommended. They had promised results within 5 to 7 business days. That week felt like a year. Every time the phone rang, I jumped. Every email notification made my stomach clench. I was suspended in a terrible limbo, caught between a devastating possibility and a sliver of hope that I was completely, utterly wrong. I spent my time trying to distract myself, but it was useless. I'd be at the grocery store, staring blankly at a wall of cereal boxes, my mind miles away, replaying every moment of the past few months. I'd try to read, only to find I'd been staring at the same page for 20 minutes, the words blurring into meaningless shapes. The what-ifs were relentless. What if I was wrong? I would have committed a terrible breach of trust, violated my family's privacy for nothing. I would have to live with the knowledge that my suspicion had turned me into someone I didn't recognize. Chloe would be justified in her anger, and I would likely lose my son for good. The shame of that possibility was a heavy cloak. But then, the other what-if would surface, the one that kept me up at night. What if I was right? The implications were catastrophic. My son, my kind, loving David, was not a father. His marriage was built on a lie of unimaginable proportions. The child he was falling in love with was not his own. The pain that truth would inflict on him was something I couldn't bear to imagine. How would he survive it? How would I help him pick up the pieces of a life that had been so cruelly shattered? There was no good outcome. I was praying for a truth that would either condemn me or destroy my son. Carol was my rock during that week. She'd come over with takeout, refusing to let me wallow alone. We'd sit at my kitchen table, and she would let me talk in circles, voicing the same fears over and over. "Whatever the answer is, Eleanor, you will handle it," she said one evening, her hand covering mine. "You are stronger than you think, and you did this out of love. Never forget that. You are trying to protect your son. That's not a crime." Her words were a small comfort, but they couldn't quell the anxiety that was my constant companion. On the 6th business day, a Friday afternoon, the email arrived. The subject line was clinical, impersonal. Case #734B. Results notification. I stared at it for a long time, my cursor hovering over the message, my hand trembling too much to click. It felt like a bomb, sitting there in my inbox, waiting for me to detonate it. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and clicked. The email was brief, simply stating that the results were ready and could be viewed by logging into their secure portal. I fumbled with the password, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. I finally logged in and saw a link. Download paternity test report. I clicked the link. A PDF file downloaded, and I opened it. My eyes scanned the page, past the technical jargon and the legal disclaimers, searching for the one piece of information that mattered. And then I saw it. A table with 3 columns: child, alleged father, and combined paternity index. I traced the line across. At the end of the row, in bold black letters, were the words that would change everything. Probability of paternity, 0%. 0. The word was so absolute, so final. There was no room for doubt, no margin for error. Conclusion: David Miller is excluded as the biological father of the child, Leo. I read the sentence again, and again. The words seemed to lift off the page and swim before my eyes. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I gripped the edge of my desk to steady myself. I was right. My wildest, most terrible fear was true. Leo was not my grandson. David was not a father. A strange mix of emotions flooded me. There was a grim, hollow sense of vindication. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't a paranoid, hysterical woman. My instincts had been right all along. But that feeling was immediately drowned by an ocean of grief. My heart broke for David. It shattered into a million pieces for the man who was, at that very moment, probably at home, holding a child he believed was his, completely oblivious to the lie that formed the very foundation of his world. And then came the anger. A cold, white-hot rage directed at Chloe. How could she do this? How could she perpetrate a deception so cruel, so calculated? She hadn't just been unfaithful. She had stolen a life from my son. She had stolen his right to be a father, his joy, his future. She had used him, his love, and his good name as a shield to hide her own secrets. And what about Leo? That innocent baby caught in the middle of this devastating mess. He was the victim in all of this, a child born into a web of deceit. What would happen to him now? My mind reeled with the consequences. This wasn't just about a broken marriage anymore. This was about the life and future of a child. I sat there in my study, the damning report glowing on my computer screen. For what felt like hours, the initial shock gave way to a chilling clarity. The time for waiting, for hoping, for investigating was over. The time for action had come. I now held the truth in my hands, a truth that was as undeniable as it was destructive. The question was no longer what the secret was. The question was what I was going to do about it. How do you tell your only son that his entire life is a lie? Holding the DNA results was like holding a lit stick of dynamite. I knew that the moment I revealed this truth, an explosion would follow, and no one would escape the blast unscathed. My first instinct was to call David immediately, to blurt it all out over the phone. But I stopped myself. This was not news to be delivered in a frantic, emotional call. This required care. It required a confrontation, face to face, where the lies would have nowhere to hide. I spent the entire weekend planning, my mind working with a cold, methodical precision I hadn't felt since my librarian days. This had to be handled perfectly. David's emotional well-being was my top priority. He couldn't hear this alone, but he also couldn't hear it with Chloe there to spin it, to manipulate him, to play the victim. It had to be all three of us, together, in a neutral space. I called David on Monday morning. "David," I said, my voice carefully controlled, "I need you and Chloe to come over for dinner on Wednesday night. It's important. It's about the future of our family." There was a gravity in my tone that he must have picked up on because he didn't argue. He didn't make excuses. He just said, "Okay, Mom. We'll be there at 7. I suspect he thought I was going to make some grand gesture of reconciliation, perhaps offer a formal apology to Chloe to smooth things over. Little did he know, I was preparing for war. The next 2 days were spent in preparation. I cooked a simple meal, a roast chicken, mashed potatoes, the kind of comfort food I used to make for David when he was a boy. I wanted the setting to be as disarmingly normal as possible. I also met with Mr. Harrison one last time. He advised me on how to present the information calmly and factually. "Let the evidence speak for itself, Eleanor," he said. "Her reaction will tell David everything he needs to know." He also prepared a list of divorce attorneys for David, a grim but necessary precaution. I put the DNA report, along with copies of Frank's surveillance photos and the record of the $50,000 deposit, into a large envelope. Wednesday night arrived. I set the table, the familiar clink of silverware on china, a surreal soundtrack to the impending storm. When the doorbell rang at 7 o'clock sharp, my heart leaped into my throat. I took a deep breath and opened the door. There they were, David, looking hopeful, carrying a bottle of wine, and Chloe, holding Leo in a baby carrier, her expression a careful mask of polite neutrality. "It smells delicious, Eleanor," she said as she stepped inside. The hypocrisy of her pleasantries was nauseating. We made it through dinner with strained, superficial conversation. Chloe talked about a new marketing campaign at work. David talked about a software bug he was fixing. I asked about Leo, and Chloe gave short, clinical answers about his sleeping and eating habits, never once offering to let me hold him. The entire meal felt like the calm before a hurricane. The tension was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. David, in his sweet oblivion, didn't seem to notice. He just seemed happy that we were all in the same room, sharing a meal. Finally, when the plates were cleared, I asked them to join me in the living room. "There's something we need to discuss," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I sat in my armchair. They sat together on the sofa, Chloe automatically positioning Leo's carrier so it was furthest from me. David looked at me, a nervous but hopeful smile on his face. "Mom, before you start," he said, "I just want to say, I'm glad we're doing this. I know things have been tense, and I'm sorry for my part in it. I want us to be a family." His words were a knife in my heart. He had no idea what was coming. "I want that too, David," I said gently. "More than anything. And that's why we need to talk about the truth." I reached for the large envelope on the side table and placed it on the coffee table in front of them. Chloe's eyes narrowed. Her polite facade began to crack, replaced by a flicker of alarm. "What is this, Eleanor?" she asked, her voice sharp. I didn't answer her. I looked directly at my son. "David, for the past few months, I have been trying to understand why I was being shut out of your life, out of Leo's life. You told me Chloe was under a lot of pressure, that there were things from her past. I was worried about you both, so I started looking for answers." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. I then opened the envelope and laid out the first set of photographs, the ones of Chloe meeting Marcus Thorne. "I know about the secret meetings, Chloe. I know about the $50,000 he wired to a secret bank account you opened." Chloe's face went white. She shot a panicked look at David, who was staring at the photos in complete confusion. "What is this? Who is that man?" David asked, looking from the photos to Chloe. "It's nothing, David," Chloe said quickly, her voice rising in pitch. "He's an old business contact. Eleanor is crazy. She's been spying on me. This is insane." "Is it?" I asked calmly, my gaze unwavering. I then laid out the next piece of evidence, the printout detailing her lie about the Chicago work trip and the truth about the Miami conference with Marcus Thorne. "Is it insane to wonder why you lied about where you were a year before you met my son? Is it insane to wonder why you were secretly meeting with that same man years later and accepting large sums of money from him?" David was now looking at Chloe, his confusion turning to dawning horror. "Chloe? What is she talking about? Tell me she's crazy." Chloe opened her mouth, but no words came out. She just stared at me with pure, undiluted hatred. And then I took out the final document, the paternity test report. I placed it on the table, the bold black words facing up. Probability of paternity, 0%. David leaned forward and picked it up. He read the report, his eyes scanning the page once, then twice. The color drained from his face, leaving him a ghastly shade of pale. He looked up, first at me, his eyes filled with a desperate hope that this was some kind of sick joke. Then he looked at Chloe. The silence in the room was absolute, deafening. It was broken by a single, choked whisper from my son. "Chloe, tell me it's not true." And in that moment, the entire web of lies collapsed. Chloe's face crumpled. The mask of composure, of defiance, of control, shattered into a million pieces. A loud, gut-wrenching sob tore from her throat. She didn't deny it. She didn't have to. Her reaction was a confession, more powerful than any words. "I'm sorry, David," she wept, her words muffled by her hands. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to find out. I was going to tell you, someday." David just stared at her, the DNA report trembling in his hand. He looked like he had been physically struck. He looked over at the baby, sleeping peacefully in his carrier, a stranger in his own home. And then he looked back at Chloe. His voice, when it finally came, was hollow, lifeless, a ghost of the man he was just minutes before. "Who?" he asked. "Who is his father?" Chloe's sobs grew louder. Through her tears, she choked out the name. Marcus Thorne. The name I had suspected all along. The confirmation was just another twist of the knife in my son's already broken heart. The explosion had happened, and we were all standing in the rubble. The aftermath of the confession was a landscape of pure devastation. David didn't yell. He didn't scream. He just sat there on the sofa, motionless, the DNA report clutched in his hand like a death certificate. He looked at Chloe, then at the sleeping baby, and a look of such profound, hollow emptiness came over his face that it will haunt me for the rest of my life. The life he had built, the future he had dreamed of, had been obliterated in the space of a single sentence. Chloe's sobs eventually subsided into hiccuping breaths. She tried to explain, her words tumbling out in a torrent of excuses and self-pity. She told a sordid story of an affair with a powerful, married man who had promised to leave his wife but never did. She'd found out she was pregnant just after he'd broken things off for good. Panicked and alone, she had reconnected with David, the kind, stable man she had dated briefly before. She had seen him as a lifeline. She confessed that she had passed Leo off as his, thinking it was the only way to give her son a stable family, a good father. She claimed she truly did fall in love with David, but was trapped by her lie. Her story was tragic in its own way, but I felt no sympathy, not when I looked at my son's shattered face. She hadn't just told a lie, she had curated a fantasy, using my son's love and trust as her props. David listened to her entire confession without saying a word. When she was finished, the room fell into another heavy silence. Then, he slowly stood up, walked over to the front door, and opened it. He looked back at Chloe, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Get out," he said. It was just 2 words, but they were delivered with the finality of a judge's sentence. "Take him, and get out of my mother's house." Chloe, her face streaked with tears, gathered Leo and her belongings, and walked out without another word. The click of the door closing behind her was the sound of my son's life breaking in 2. As soon as she was gone, David collapsed. He sank onto the floor, his back against the closed door, and finally, the dam broke. He sobbed, not loudly, but with deep, ragged breaths that tore at my soul. I went to him, sat on the floor beside him, and wrapped my arms around my son, my only child, and held him as he grieved the loss of a son he never had and a wife he never knew. There were no words of comfort that could possibly touch a pain that deep, so I just held him, rocking him gently, just as I had when he was a little boy with a scraped knee. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and emotional triage. David moved in with me, unable to bear the thought of returning to the house he had shared with Chloe, a house now filled with the ghosts of a false life. He was a shell of himself, quiet and withdrawn. I gave him the list of divorce attorneys Mr. Harrison had prepared, and he numbly made the call. The divorce was messy, but swift. Chloe, facing the threat of a fraud lawsuit, agreed to all of David's terms. She wanted nothing from him, only to disappear with her son and deal with the fallout from the true biological father, Marcus Thorne. We heard through the legal channels that Thorne, forced into a corner, was now involved, his own marriage imploding under the weight of the scandal. Their drama was no longer our concern. My focus was solely on David. I cooked for him. I listened when he wanted to talk, which was rarely, and I sat in comfortable silence with him when he didn't. We took long walks, just like we used to when he was a teenager trying to figure out his place in the world. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to heal. The nursery in my house, the one I had prepared for a grandson who wasn't mine, became a symbol of our shared loss. One Saturday, David and I went in there together. We packed up the tiny clothes, dismantled the crib, and took the hand-knitted blankets to a local women's shelter. It was a painful but necessary act of letting go. As we painted over the cheerful giraffes and elephants with a calm, neutral white, it felt like we were painting over a painful chapter of our lives, preparing a blank canvas for whatever came next. It's been a year now. The wounds are still there, but they are no longer gaping. They are scars that tell a story of betrayal, but also of survival. David has started to smile again, a real smile that reaches his eyes. He's focused on his work, reconnected with old friends, and is slowly rebuilding his life on his own terms. He talks about perhaps dating again someday, but not yet. He's learning to trust himself again first. And me? I am no longer just a grandmother in waiting. I am a mother, a friend, a survivor. My relationship with my son has been forged anew in the fires of this crisis. We are closer than ever, bound by a shared experience and a deep, unconditional love. I will never be Leo's grandmother, and I have made my peace with that. I pray that he grows up happy and loved, far away from the deceit that marked his birth. My dream of being a grandmother may have been deferred, but my purpose as a mother has never been clearer. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that closed curtain in the hospital. What felt like the end of my world was actually the beginning of a painful journey to the truth. The truth hurt. It tore us apart, but it also set us free. It freed my son from a life built on lies, and it freed me from the role of a passive, heartbroken victim. We survived. And in the quiet strength I see in my son's eyes today, I know that we will continue to do more than just survive. We will thrive. Thank you for listening to my story.